Well, welcome. This is the second in our series of Voices from the Ground. We're talking to people who live in the Holy Land, in Israel, Palestine, and asking them what they think about the current situation, what's going on there, and maybe some of the background and how that's impacting them. So my very special guest today is Dr. Jack Sara, who's the president of the Bethlehem Bible College, and we're going to talk about some of the issues here. Welcome to you, Jack.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Brother Bernie. I'm honored to be with you on this interview.
Thank you. Yeah, good to have you. Thanks for putting the time aside. Really appreciate that. So maybe let's put it in a bigger context. What's going on? The Middle East has always been a boiling point of conflict and violence for a very long time. Why do you think that's the case? What do you think's going on?
It's a context that has been going on for over 100 years, and of course, someone like me who have been living in Jerusalem all of my life. I mean, I'm 50 years old now. My grandfather experienced the war of 1944, and again, some of the uproars in 1936 with the uprising against the British, and a lot of things that were basically hard here during that time. And then my father was born in the 40s, and I am now. And then my son was 21 years old, so almost 4 generations of my family. We've been all our life experience had a relationship with war, turmoil, occupation, being occupied, becoming refugees. Like both my grandfathers, their houses were taken from them. They became refugees at the wake of 1948, and then again in 1967, losing everything, restarting their life again after 67. And then I grew up in a family where my dad and mom wanted to shield us from all the difficulties and the politics of here. But again, things jump in our face where you have an uprising after uprising with wars going on and on with nonstop. If I can pinpoint a reason, it's really a sad story of colonial powers trying to steal the lands of other nations and basically take what is best and leave the worst. If I'm simplifying, to be honest with you, but this struggle has been going on for a long time. And the last episode of past 6 months after October 7 was another eruption of such so long unresolved conflict due to a lot of things, sadly speaking, sometimes instead of Christians standing on the side of peace, you see Christians siding on the side of war, thinking of the future rather than thinking how I can be involved today in making peace. I am called as a peacemaker in the middle of such conflict. I try my best to preach peace, to teach peace, but yet it would be difficult as well when you're living in such an atmosphere where you also are experiencing this injustice inflicted on you and your people. We are in the middle of this. It happens because of greed of human beings, the sin, of course. We all believe, sin is the major cause for all conflict, all the way starting from Cain and Abel and onward, with everything happening globally. Sad story that it's not only the Middle East, as we speak now, there are other regions, other countries, includes our region here, Syria, Sudan, and other places that really evil is strong and death toll is rising. And instead of people speaking for life and engaging in building, these communities, sometimes we stand in apathetic kind of like attitude, not wanting to be involved in changing what's going on the ground. Sadly, I'm talking as a Christian.
If you went back to, way back in history, 1,500 years ago, the area was nominally at least 100% Christian, and that changed with the coming of Islam. What influence do you think, say, Muhammad, Islam has had on the current situation?
I wouldn't say Muhammad and Islam. It's a big story, honestly. We are Palestinian Christians, so we as Palestinian Christians would have the claim of being here for nobody else, not anyone else could claim this claim, honestly. Middle Eastern Christians in general and Palestinian Christians in particular could claim that we have been here for 2,000 years, after the time of Christ. I'm not bragging about it or speaking it in a proud way as much as It's our legacy. We carry it. It's an honor, a responsibility at the same time, to try to live the life of those Christians that lived here in Jerusalem and Bethlehem and the surrounding, and be able to reach out to the ends of the earth with the message of the gospel. We're trying. I don't know if you know this, when Gordon Conwell Center for Mission Studies did a study on which is the country that sends the most missionaries per capita. Palestine won. Palestine was number one. I know there are others and many churches, but our church here is small. And the Palestinian church in general has been here suffering, struggling under all the empires, all including the Christian empire that was here between the 3rd and the 7th century. After Christianity started to spread in the 1st century, more and more increasingly Christian presence in this country, less Jewish presence, because a lot of the Jews were expelled in AD 70 and then AD 130 with the incoming of Hadrian, who really didn't want, not just Jews, didn't want anything unrelated to Roman religion. And he basically posted himself all over Jerusalem and elsewhere with his status on top of those places because he believed he's God. Then we have the rise by the 4th century of what's called the Byzantine Empire, which, whether it started with Constantine the Great, the son of Helen, who built several of the churches that we still fame and have here in Bethlehem and in Jerusalem, including the most precious and most important Christian site in the country, which is the Holy Sepulchre, in addition to the Nativity Church, which is in Bethlehem. And then from the 4th century, you get more and more Christian presence in the Middle East and in Palestine and elsewhere, where Christians are on the rise in their numbers. Some came by their own will and others either converted. Again, we have to read in between the lines. How would you get hundreds of millions of people converting to Christianity or being subdued under this Christian empire? It's a big question that, Christian historians, of course, need to keep on digging. Not always Christianity spread by peace and love and, receive Jesus as your Lord and Savior. Sometimes it enlarged or increased in different ways. Up till the 7th century, a strong Christian presence here. And you look in Jerusalem at the 5th, 6th century, you get these humongous churches built in Jerusalem, and Jerusalem being declared as a totally Christian city, with the prime Holy Sepulchre Church as a major church, Holy Zion Church as a big church, and Ania Church as a church. So churches were humongous big. The only time that the attack happened is like 614 when the Persians came. And the Persians came to attack the Byzantines, to weaken them, and basically destroyed most of the churches in this country. Only a few churches remained. After the Persians went, again, the Byzantines tried to build on top of them, but it was a disastrous event. And by that time, Byzantium was already weak. The churches were fighting each other. Christians were fighting each other. Christians were persecuting each other, East and West, and Nestorians and all of those sorts of things. And you get a very, sadly speaking, weak church that its teaching, its promotion was either politics or dealing with what they called heresy, and anyone did not agree with them was deemed as heretic, to the point that a lot of Christians ended up in Arabia and elsewhere just being in exile or hiding because of the persecution that broke against them from their brethren, from the Christians. And then you get the rise of Islam, which started as a social movement. Again, it wasn't as religious and fanatic as a lot of people describe it. The Prophet of Islam, Muhammad, comes with a message basically to reform his own community, his own context, thinking that he's bringing a religion that precedes Christianity and Judaism. And you get into what they call it the Futuhat al-Islamiyya, which is the openings, which means Islam coming to bring this new religion into countries. Countries like North Africa and Spain, it was by the sword and the arm. Till the 11th century, the rise of the Crusaders in 1099, when Pope Urban, preached his famous sermon. That starts, another episode of history for our country and our region, which we call the Crusaders, with several failing crusades and some that basically kind of like were slaughterous, where they won the country here at least for 100 years. You get this whole feud between the Muslims and the Crusaders for quite a period. And then all the way from the 13th century up till the early 20th century, you get Islam and then the Ottomans ruling over our country.
Historically, do you have the impression that Christians lived well under Islam?
Well, it fluctuates, depends when and where and who. So in some places, yes, like during the Abbasid, dynasty, they were ministers, they were, in charge of the finances, they were scholars. And then you get a period when they are in some places persecuted. So it is, I wouldn't say, it's a very generalizing to say Christians live this way under Islam, because is it in Egypt? Is it in Spain? Is it in Syria? Is it in Lebanon? Or where? Kind of like you have to really be very particular in this. And that's, I think, one of the areas where we Christians really think of Islam as, in general terminology, when Islam is not, a unified unit of everyone is the same and every place is the same as well. You take, for example, in the 17th century, Palestine, when you had this guy, Daher Omar, who was, in a way, he wanted to kind of like reach away from the Ottomans, started to build cities in the Galilee, and he invites Christians and Jews to build, neighborhoods in the city of Tiberias. He invites religious Jews all the way from Spain and Europe to come and establish a huge neighborhood in Tiberias, which is, it's remained standstill now. On the other side, you get a ruler in Iraq or elsewhere where he's not friendly with the Christians, or what happened with the Armenian Assyrian genocide, 1915. So it really varies from place to place, and some of it is moved by religion, other moved by political motivations.
So currently Bethlehem is part of the Palestinian territories.
Yeah, Bethlehem, since 1990, after 1995, came under Palestinian Authority, part of Palestine in what we call now Area A. When the Oslo Accords happened, there was a distinctions or distinguishing, between an Area B, C, and Bethlehem totally became Area A under the Palestinian Authority.
How has that been for you as a Christian community?
I think by all means, the Palestinian Authority have been trying hard to help the Christians to thrive in many ways. Of course, one of them is involving them in politics, being ministers, being mayors. That Bethlehem Governorate, not just Bethlehem City, 3 of the cities, in the main cities in Bethlehem, according to the law, the mayor has to be always a Christian. This includes Bethlehem, this includes Beit Jala, this includes Beit Sahur, and even Ramallah, which is, the Christians, not even 5,000 there. And the mayor, according to the law, has to be always a Christian. Okay. This tells you where the Palestinian Authority is in terms of giving the Christians their place, understanding that Christians were here before Islam. Christians have a major contribution to a lot of things in the Palestinian economy, culture. I mean, most of the universities in Bethlehem and, Berzeit, these are Christian universities in general. Most of the hospitals, so it has been an interesting relationship from the Muslim government to the Christians who don't even make 1%, yet their impact probably could be measured by 30%.
Now, the numbers of Christians in the Palestinian areas is dropping, but I hear it's growing in the Israeli-controlled areas. Is that your perception?
I don't think so. I mean, I don't know where you get the statistics. I think it's dropping in all the places. In Israel, the figures sometimes tricks us because they include non-Palestinian Christian Arab Christians in Israel. This includes Russian, includes Ethiopians, includes Filipinos, includes Nigerians, include Christians who call themselves Christians and became residents of Israel. 1.5% of the Israeli population are Christian, and 1% of the Palestinian population are Christian. Yes. Christians in Palestine have been decreasing because of immigration. Palestinian Christians are being native Arabic-speaking group that basically has been living in the Holy Land for centuries. Some of us claim descent from the times of the early church, from the early, ages. But there are all sorts of Christians in this country. We measure about 15 denominations, including the evangelicals. The Palestinian Authority have recognized the evangelicals in the country as a church. However, Israel does not recognize evangelicals yet. They recognize them as entities, as NGOs, but they have not given us yet the status of a denomination.
What about the Messianic communities? Are they recognized as churches in Israel?
The Messianic communities are recognized as Jews. They don't want to be churches. They want to be kind of like careful not to be called Christians. Between Israel and Palestine, we have about 55 congregations all over the country. Some are Baptists, Assemblies of God, Nazarene, Christian Missionary Alliance, like my own church denomination, CMA, Open Brethren, Plymouth Brethren, in the West Bank and Gaza. Like for Gaza, we have a Baptist church that was established a while ago by the Southern Baptist Convention, and now it is in Gaza till now. I mean, we still have that church. But sadly, because of what you just alluded a while ago, which is basically the presence that is vanishing, especially within the last century, we get the numbers dwindling of Christians, specifically from 1948. So the number dropped, not from now. I mean, the number of Christians started to drop a little bit prior to 1948. And at the wake of 1948, it was one of the most catastrophic events for the church in this country. And this includes my own church, the Christian Missionary Alliance, an evangelical denomination. And my church had a great center in what's called West Jerusalem today. And in 1948, they all had to flee away, ended up all the way in East Jerusalem, in the Old City, or in Jordan and elsewhere, to the point that the church was not used between 1948 to 1967. It vanished. It's reported in the 20s and the 30s that the church was packed, 200, 300 Christians would meet in that. This is an evangelical group. And after 1948, we barely found 20 or 25 of them to meet again. So it was a drastic. And then from that moment onward, 1967, 87, 2000, every episode, it hits hard on the Christian presence. In 2022, there was over 45,000 Christians living in the West Bank and Gaza Strip. Today, this is 1% of the total Palestinian population. And this is the number in Israel, which is around 120,000 Arab Christians, which is 0.7% of the Israelis and 9% of Arab Israelis. And still we have about more or less 9,000 Arab Palestinian Christians live in West and East Jerusalem.
The percentage of Arab Israelis, what would that be?
Of Arab Israelis, that 9%.
Let's talk about the ownership of the land. That's been something that's been disputed, particularly over this last century. What kind of thoughts do you have about that?
The ownership of the land is a very interesting question, because a lot of the Christians here, especially the churches, had quite a lot of lots of ownership over, come to East Jerusalem, the old city of Jerusalem. Over 2/3 of Jerusalem is owned by churches. Lots of lands all over what's called West Jerusalem and the other, places in Nazareth. So church property is quite humongous. Church properties were at one time, one of the most prestigious and elaborative in terms of how much they owned. Now, some of it, they owned it because they bought it or they kind of like built on it, and others because the Christians who lived under, the Ottoman Empire, sometimes they wrote the deeds of their houses in the name of the churches for protection.
So maybe going back to October the 7th, what happened on that day, let's do a hypothetical here. If you received a phone call from Benjamin Netanyahu that day and he said, Jack, I want some advice on how we should respond as the state of Israel, what would you have said to him?
Well, I wish he calls me. I fear that some of the leaders, whether it's Netanyahu or others, do the son of Solomon did in the past. Instead of consulting with wise and kind of like taking a breath and waiting a bit before they respond, and really kind of like responding with a way that kind of like reflects wisdom and reflects patience and reflects some sort of mercy, as they think. It reminded me of the story. I went and consulted the wrong advisors, by all means, during Jeroboam times. October 7th was shock to all of us. It was shocking to us. I was not in the country when that happened. Bernie, I was flying out on the 6th of October at 11:30 p.m. that evening. I flew out of Tel Aviv. I landed in America, Newark, New Jersey, at 7 a.m. America time, which was already like 1 p.m. our time. And I heard of what happened. It was like, I couldn't believe it. It was almost an impossible thing to think of, that this had happened just within the past few hours when I am on the air, in a way. I was shocked, of course. My wife is sending me all these images, all this news, the news you get on your phone. And I couldn't believe that this had happened, with the unprecedented number of Israeli casualties. Several hundred military men and women were killed as well. And over 200 people were taking captives, hostages into Gaza. And of course, everyone is as shocked, including all the Palestinians, but they couldn't, believe that this could happen. And of course, Israel declared the state of war and began to attack in Gaza. And Gaza is a very small, strip, with over, 2 million people living in there, and 2/3 of Gaza residents being refugees. Like, if you know the residents of refugees, these are refugees who came from places like Jaffa, Ashkelon, Ashdod, and surrounding Majdal, these Beersheba. These were refugees who ended up in some refugee camps that are highly dense, highly populated areas in Gaza. So anywhere Israel is going to bomb, even if they're not targeting, civilians, possibly, I'm saying hundreds of civilians will die in what a word that I don't like to use, but it is, sadly speaking, used widely, collateral damage, which innocent people always die, men and women and children. Houses will be demolished. This is how Gaza looked like. And after the blockade of 2007 all the way, it was an open air prison by all means. So it was hard, that this could happen. It was hard to see the abhorring event that Hamas did against, civilians and army people in Israel. Of course, as a Christian, I don't agree with killing. It's not of our approval. And at the same time, I would say what happened next is also very difficult, because that meant that more and more people would be killed. And by now, we're talking about over 35,000 people who were killed, and both here and there. It's estimated by the Palestinians, 34,000 people killed. It's estimated by the Israelis that 33,000 killed. So any number, even if it's 10, 15, 20,000, with the majority of them being women and children, it's really hard to grasp, honestly. Nothing could justify this. Like, I cannot justify the killing of that 1,200 Israelis. I cannot justify, by all means, the killing of the Palestinians as well. Both are not justifiable.
Yeah. What do you think would have been a good response from Israel?
I really can't say now, right? This is the good response. I think patience, consultation, negotiation, whether it is limited retaliation, targeted retaliation, whatever. Israel has the technology. Israel is a superpower. Come on. I mean, we're not living in a country that is, I could compare with the Hamas group. We cannot compare them. We're living in a country where, 3 days ago, when they wanted to kind of like challenge Iran, they sent drones that kind of like could even not just bomb the whole nuclear power, it could change the whole face of Iran. Not even a superpower could challenge it. So, with the technology and everything else, I mean, things have been done differently. They have been negotiating. I mean, it seems that they are able to negotiate things. They did speak with Qatar, they did speak with Egypt, and they could kind of like brought in international players to change the setting and the outcome. And instead of really devastating Gaza with almost like a total devastation, I mean, maybe something else could have been done. I don't know. And as a Christian, I mourn. Any killing is hard to kind of like for us to grasp. I wouldn't say, this response or that response would be the best, but I think there could have been other means. And there could have been other means than retaliation.
Do you think Hamas would have been open to negotiation at that stage?
Well, they are open. They have been negotiating with them already. Just to think of negotiation, Hamas had been negotiating with Israel. I mean, by indirectly. It was directly, but Qatar and Egypt and other parties were involved in negotiation with them. So it seems there are channels that could have been used and used. Of course, Hamas wanted, prisoner exchange, and they wanted all sorts of things. I think there could have been negotiation and other means than just devastation.
You've traveled to Gaza before?
I haven't been able to go to Gaza. I did, but since the year 2000, I haven't been able to go, and I was refused for entry. And since then, things were difficult on the ground. You know, we have Baptist Church in Gaza, and we used to have, as a Bible college, a center in Gaza where we train our students, and then we have connection with a school, preschool, the Manara preschool, which is run by the Assemblies of God in Gaza. We communicate with a lot of the Christians in Gaza in particular.
From your understanding of Gaza, like the common view would be that they're dedicated to the destruction of Israel. That's what you find in their charter. Is that your understanding of them for Hamas?
Even if they are dedicated, that doesn't mean that they are able to, and they have the means to. You know, even if they say that, I don't know. I haven't seen that charter that everybody's keeping. Have you seen it, Bernie?
Yeah. So there was one that came out in 2018, which kind of said we're not against the Jews as a people, but they said we're against the Zionists.
I never seen it. You know, I've heard about it, but never seen it. But again, you know, knowing who is Israel and its powers and its capacity, I mean, it would be a joke to think that Hamas group will be able to do anything, honestly. You know, there will be noise, of course. There will be always a noise. There will be always, they will cause some harm. I cannot minimize that. They will be able to do certain things, and sad, but I don't think they even come close to threaten the existence of Israel.
So you wouldn't take them seriously?
No, I can't take Iran seriously. Iran, which is 1,000 times or even 100,000 times stronger, I wouldn't take it seriously.
So how do you think, like, as an international community, we should deal with Hamas?
I think there is two things. Again, you know, I don't think if you need to deal with Hamas, that's one thing. You know, I think Hamas, in a way, as a group, you know, everybody has a problem with a certain political or militia group like that here or there. I don't know if we need to deal with them. I think we need to really kind of like be able to communicate with the Palestinian Authority and empower them to be able to kind of like rule over all the Palestinian territories. You know, sadly speaking, you know, the international community have sidelined Palestinian Authority. They ignored the Palestinian Authority to the point that it weakened them in Gaza and in the West Bank. In Gaza, you know, with the coup that happened back in 2007, that was sad. Hamas took Gaza by power. They didn't take them by votes or election at that time, even though there was election.
They won the election.
They won, you know, they won it, but they could, again, the results were not based on majority of the people voting on them. It was based on the weak basis that many of the parties, the Palestinian parties, went into the poll. I mean, imagine you have 50 Palestinian groups and you have only one Hamas, you know, 49 other groups that were fragmented and divided, and 20 groups for Fatah and this group for that. And it was really a joke, honestly, Bernie. I think for me, if you ask my advice, I think it was too premature to ask the Palestinian Authority to run an election when you're not even 8 years into governance. I mean, some countries have been over 100 years, 150 till they knew what election is. You know, when they pressed hard on the Palestinians to have election and the democratic results came up with this group, everybody else said, we don't, you know, they lifted up their hands instead of saying, no, let's change things. Let's not, you know, push too hard, you know, let's kind of like work together, walk a baby steps with this new government that was formed, etc. Again, you know, I'm speaking out of my head. I never studied politics, nor did a degree in political science, to be honest, and things. I did theology. I understand humans. I understand sociology. I do missions. I preach the gospel. You know, I want people to be saved. I want people not to be killed. I preach what Jesus preached in John 10:10. You know, I came that they may have life and life in its abundance. It's the devil that wants death. It's the devil that wants killing. It's the devil that wants the destruction of any group of people, whether it is Israelis or the Palestinians. I am for humans. You know, I send my kids to school where Jews and Palestinians study together, grow up together, study peace together, because this is what I believe. I'm pacifist, you know, which means I'm against anyone that carries a weapon, and I will not send my child or go to army, you know. And all of this tells you, you know, that really, and this is the description of many of the Christians here. we're against violence at all. It's always to find other solutions to be involved. Israel is occupied our land. Israel occupied our country. It took it by force. They killed Palestinians. And this need to be as well kind of like dealt with. The history of 75 years of injustice against the Palestinians. And it seems that people are just concerned about what happened on October 7, as if this were our history started, forgetting that it started a long time before this. Not minimizing and not justifying, what happened, but at the same time putting it in context of over 80 years of injustice.
In terms of your living as a Christian in Bethlehem, what limitations do you feel under? Can you ring church bells? Can you have processions?
Everything. I wish I can do this in Israel. There'll be a lot of limitation. Take, for example, worship in the Holy Sepulchre. I mean, every year there will be a barrage of armies standing by us. We cannot go to worship easily. Limited number of people. Christians are being crushed, sometimes beaten, sometimes imprisoned. A lot of the priests are being spat at all the time in Jerusalem. Some of our churches, my own church, the Alliance Church, was firebombed by Orthodox Jews in Jerusalem. And the police, it went unchecked, and the police did nothing to that. We have cases after cases of churches being attacked, and the people who are the propagators, no one follows after that. They just go, sometimes they tell us they're crazy people, sometimes they say the fanatic people, but only the international media and the press carries that, then it goes into more action. But when no one hears about them, they just go unchecked.
In Bethlehem itself, could you, for example, have a Christian bookstall out in the street?
We have several. Annual bookstore, we have Jesus the King bookstore, we have our own bookstore. So we have a lot of Christian bookstores, even evangelistic, sometimes open air evangelistic events on the streets of Bethlehem.
How about like social restrictions? Could, for example, a Christian man marry a Muslim woman or vice versa within the society?
It's a taboo because of religious issues. I mean, in Israel, you cannot do that. Sometimes even in Europe, you cannot do. It's not about the rules or the government laws. Sometimes it's about the culture, the context. There is description. I cannot hide the fact that sometimes it's easier for a Muslim to marry a Christian than a Christian to marry a Muslim. That's known. It's because the majority, you talk about 99% of the total population. And the issue is not only religion, it's also shame and honor. Our culture, as in contrary to some Western cultures, when you are, for example, if my sister, who's a Christian, marries a Muslim, the whole family will be in shame. And I would be the first one, or if I wasn't a believer who believes in different ways, I would be the first one to take responsibility to over this issue, because it will bring shame on me. Just imagine if a Muslim marries a Christian or a Muslim converts openly, they will be shaming all their family in the streets and everywhere, because it's a community here. People live together, they know each other. So things like this could cause feuds in the community rather than just law and order. I mean, in Australia, you saw sometimes, Christians go and like we had this bishop who was attacked not long time ago. I mean, a few days ago, which is very difficult. He felt he's more in a democratic country. He could speak whatever he could. And sadly, you saw the attack. It cannot happen in the Middle East, because basically it'll be the community who will be after you, and it's difficult because you would cause what they call the community feuds, and this is what governments both in Israel and in Palestine, in Jordan and elsewhere, want to keep the harmony between the fabrics of the society.
You talked about being evangelistic. Would that be only within the Christian community, or can you do that in the Muslim community?
Well, our community outside is majority Muslims. So when things happen, now, of course, you have to be smart. You could be persecuted even in a Western country if you are intentionally show that you're only attacking or attracting people who are not from the same religion like you. We use Christian events, Christmas and Easter, to share the good message of the gospel. It is received widely.
You mentioned before about the churches shrinking in places like Iraq and Syria, Egypt. Why do you think that's the case?
I think it's because of the colonial powers. Christians only started to dwindle after America attacked Iraq. I mean, before the American invasion and the Western invasion, we had 1.5 million Christians in Iraq. Today, we barely have 300,000, and that spread all over the Middle East, in Syria, in Egypt. In Egypt, it remained the same. I wouldn't say we had major issues. So Egypt would be the best scenario case for Christians in the Middle East. Jordan as well, by all means. Jordan, with its stability, with its political instability, Christians have been thriving. I mean, I was just in Amman, and Christians there love their government, love the king, and pray always, for the stability of Jordan, because it has been really giving the Christians their, to whatever extent they could, the rights in being there, and realizing that Christians are part and parcel of their society. But sadly, because of the wars and the rise of fanatic groups in places like Syria and Iraq, and the rise of ISIS, which, again, if there was no invasion and no weakening of the governments of Iraq and Syria and elsewhere, we wouldn't have them coming out and doing what they did. So when you asked Christians in the past, what's the worst thing that happened to Iraq? They said the removal of Saddam. When you ask now the Syrian Christians, they say the attacking of Assad. So again, it's a paradox for Western Christians to understand, but always the interference of local, into a certain country, when you have this harmony, this movement, this strength, when you talk about 1.5 million Christians in Iraq that went out to 300,000 and less today, I mean, it's really baffling and mind-blowing to know. And we are, me and other leaders in the region, I don't even only lead within the Palestinian Authority, as you know, and in Israel and in Jordan, and I have responsibility within the whole Middle East and North Africa. And everyone is really kind of like feeling this existential threat on our presence as Christians in the region.
The way for Christians to survive is simply just to keep their place and make themselves a small target.
Not really. Sometimes they leave. They just leave the countries. They go to somewhere else where they could thrive. So it's not always the stay. I wish, I'm afraid that one day, our country or our churches would be only museums without the presence of local Christians. This is something really I worry about. When you have over 200,000 Christians in Israel-Palestine today, and I'm speaking in general, forget the smaller. If you talk about our communities, yet they're small, but they're seen. You could see them over the ground. Even though among millions, you could see that even these few thousands of Christians are there on the surface. They're surfacing, and they need to be empowered. But with the non-involvement of many of us, like today, especially Christians. I mean, Bernie, what's sad is that instead of the Christians being engaging in really kind of like endeavors for building Christian communities and peace, you get Christians in the West. I hope it's not happening on your side down under. But you have Christians in the West supporting weaponry, supporting arms, supporting things, which is abhorring. This is. Can you fathom this? I don't know if you can justify it by all means. That a Christian church, instead of engaging in supporting a small Christian community in Gaza or a small church in Israel. I mean, with the Messianic Jews, there's about 10,000 Messianic Jews in this country. And one time I was listening to one of the main leaders of Messianic Judaism here, and he was mourning. He said in one accord, he said last year Israel received over $300 million from Christian churches in America. Mm-hmm. And he said, guess how much of those went into building anything related to a Christian ministry, Messianic ministry, or kingdom-related ministry? He said only 5%. And the rest went into, community buildings, building a tree, an ambulance, buying weapons, and you name it. So this Israeli leader was mourning that if this money was invested in ministries that are engaging in preaching the gospel and in building schools in building hospitals, whatever, ministries that are viable, that could be tangible, that the communities around us could see that these are the Christians who are doing this in Jesus' name, rather than just supporting war or supporting arms. I mean, things could have been different on the ground.
Yeah, and you think that they would have had the freedom to be able to do that if the funds were there?
Of course. we do have the freedom. I run a ministry, and other run a ministry that will receive funding to do whatever we feel according, of course, to our calling. If I'm receiving funds for universities, then I want to develop an academic program. You are in a university, and you know how much money you need to develop academicians and programs and building courses and putting things online. I mean, everything needs support.
Maybe just a final question. Where does you see the gospel fitting into all of this, into the situation in the Middle East, in Israel, Palestine, the Holy Land?
I think the Christians have been standing on the wrong side of things in terms of biblical response. I think Christians globally should engage more into being a prophetic voice and speaking truth to power sometimes, rather than being in bed with those who are perpetrating, wars and even doing things like this. And as I said, becoming a prophetic voice, Christians need to pray for the situation and really think, are these sort of actions demonstration of our Lord Jesus' will or his kingdom? Of course, they are not. Like I told you before, I believe that we have to declare life for Palestinians and Israelis. I mean, Jews and Muslims and Christians need Jesus. And we need to realize this. It's not about time to take a political stance. I stand with Israel, or I stand with Palestine, or I stand with this or that. It's time I stand with the voice of truth for people, looking at them all as humans who are in need of Jesus. And these are some of the prayers, like, at the wake of October 7, we're asking people to pray for both Palestinians and Israelis, for the safety of the communities in Gaza, in the West Bank, in Israel, in Tel Aviv, in the Galilee. At the borders with Lebanon, where communities have been evacuated from there. So it is hard to think, of all of this, happening, and Christians are siding only, on a certain side and thinking in a certain way, instead of being engaging in Islamophobias and generalizing about this and that. Really engaging in ministries on the ground that are doing tangible work, bringing relief into the needy in Gaza, bringing relief into the needy who are evacuated from their houses, doing things that are really in the name of Christ rather than in different names.
Thank you. Well, look, that looks like a good place to finish up. Thank you so much for your time and for your experience and insight and eloquence. Really appreciate the time we had together.
Thank you, Bernie. Thank
God
you.
bless. All right. Thank you.